The Seven Secrets of Somewhere Lake by Sam Campbell. Chapter 19. Indian World. John and Kona stayed at a neighboring cabin for the night. We had breakfast with them the next morning. Our table in the lodge dining room was right before one of the huge picture windows through which we looked down into the canyon. Word had gone about the lodge that we were back from our canyon trip, and suddenly Jenny and I found ourselves the center of attention. Our little waitress and the dining room hostess came up with the greeting, "So you came back. Was it such a surprising thing that we did?" The hotel manager approached the table and greeted us with, "So you came back." Jack Burns walked in the length of the dining room, spurs clicking every step, to say through a broad smile, "So you came back." I felt about ready for a Congressional Medal of Honor. "Jack," I said, after reassuring the admiring multitude that we had come back, "Jenny and I have been noticing how much more friendly the canyon seems now. We feel that we are part of it." "I knew you would say that," he exclaimed triumphantly. "Everyone who goes down the trail sees he made friends with the canyon on the trip. You see," he brought his great hand down on my shoulder with such force I felt the shock down to my ankles. "You have been initiated." I was sure I knew what he meant. "You are no longer a tenderfoot and a visitor. You have joined the canyon fraternity. You're one of us, my friend," he affirmed. "You'll never get away from us now." "We don't want to go away," commented Jenny. "Sam and I will have to see this country regularly, and we are going down again, aren't we, dear?" I nodded my head, but secretly I was glad the next trip was in the distant future. "Our friends John and Kona are taking us into the back country today," I informed him. "Good," said Jack. "No one knows the country better than he." "Where to, John?" John named the area into which we were going. Oh, said Jack, raising his eyebrows. "That is wild country. Reckon no one has been out there for a year or more. Going on the old fire lane?" "Yes. Hope you make it. By the time you get there, you'll think you have had another ride on Z-Bar." Between conversations, we finished our breakfast and then went about final preparations for our next adventure. A wire was dispatched to Hybub and Tony, reading, "Your letters awaiting us when we came out of the canyon. Glad life is not monotonous back there. Don't worry about animals. Just be careful not to get lost yourselves. We'll write in a few days. Love, Jenny and Sam." The journey to the Indians' camp was all that Jack had said it would be. I think I know now how it would feel to be a pebble inside a baby's rattle. It was the first time I had ever followed a blazed trail by automobile. The fire lane on which we started had some resemblance to a road in its early stages, but soon this disappeared and John was driving by marks on trees. The ground was hard but rough and uneven. Molo was a miracle of endurance. "What with Canyon of Kawar is this?" I asked, as I shuddered between the seat and the car top. "Made it myself, out of spare parts," answered John, a little more steady in his position back of the wheel. "I call it a Hopi special, meaning we Hopi we get where we are going." "Whee!" yelled Kona, who was having the time of his life. He and Jenny were in the back seat, where it was rougher, if possible, than where John and I sat. He said something that provoked John to answer. "Kia, no, you bohunk." Then to me, "Do you know what he says? He wants me to find bigger bumps to go over. This is too smooth for him." "Whee!" cried Kona as we went over a log. Mulo, the Hopi special, held together until we reached the Indians' camp late in the afternoon. Two fenders were waving and rattling furiously for the last few miles, but John said he could tighten them. The camp was in a grove of beautiful aspens. Twabi, Kona and John called these graceful trees. The Indians' tent was pitched in the shelter of a high rock, and near them they had cleared a place for ours. 100 yards away was the edge of a canyon, a tributary to the Grand Canyon. Down a short way on a trail was a fine spring, the source of the camp water supply. As we began putting up our tent, Kona went wild with joy. John explained that he was always happy when they camped in faraway places, and now that Jenny and I were to camp there too, he was out of control. In fact, he was a precious nuisance. Every move I tried to make, he was right in the way. John put him aside a dozen times, gave him tasks invented to keep him busy. He even put him up in a tree, but each time he was back under feet in less than a minute. He had learned to say our names, or at least words that sounded something like them. We had to convince John that we did not consider it discourteous in the least, and that Kona was allowed to call us Jenna and Soam, which was as near as he could get them. Presently the youngster came towards me, crawling on his hands and knees, saying, "Sam honi, grr honi." "Oh," said John, and I looked at him for explanation. "He is Honani, the badger." He was positively delighted when he heard Jenny and me call him Honani. In fact, whenever we learned and used a Hopi word, a regular gusher of giggles came from the boy. Since we liked to hear him giggle, our Hopi vocabulary was constantly on the increase. Now he came hopping along. He was Tuvo, the rabbit. Alternately, he became Honanu, the bear, Latug, Teigo, the gray fox, Pucha, the skunk, Panwu, the mountain sheep, Tukai, the prairie dog, and Manuau, the porcupine. Once we had learned the names, he tested us by imitating the animals, and we were supposed to tell him what it was. John helped us a little, so we got along fairly well. It was sufficient reward to hear Kona's outburst of delight when we got it right. In spite of Kona, we got our tents in order. That is the first rule of good camping, to make ready for the night. Jenny and John cooperated in getting dinner ready, and Kona and I walked down to the canyon rim to look at the sunset. "Sound," he said, tugging at my hand and pointing to the west. "Twa." "Twa," I repeated, understanding it to mean sunset. He laughed delightedly. "Sound," he said again, pointing overhead. "Kachi." I noted he was indicating the new moon, now sharply outlined in the darkening sky. "Kachi," I said, and Kona said, "Wee," which is the same in any language. Later I learned that this word means not just moon, but refers to a crescent moon on its back. Our dinner was a good one. Afterwards, at Jenny's special request, we had an evening campfire. Kona helped us identify voices of Isava, the coyote, Zurana, the little frog that calls constantly, Monvu, the owl, and Tokochi, the wildcat. At last he settled in Jenny's arms. It had been a busy day for such a little man. Presently he was in the land of dreams. John sat looking through the night towards the canyon. The afterglow persisted in the western sky, creating the young moon and sending a mellow light across the landscape that gave indistinct outline to distant formations. To numerous mists, born of the chill evening air, rendered that filmy, shadowy effect that savors the dreams and legends. Jenny and I spoke in low voices of the beauty about us. But John, entering not into conversation, and indeed seemed not to hear us. In the red glow of the campfire, he presented a picture which will remain in our memory. His eyes became wide, staring and fixed as though he were penetrating the veil of appearances and looked into some distant realm and remote time. For many minutes, he moved not a muscle, nor did he respond to the occasional remarks addressed to him. Presently he began a low chant, which Jenny said later sent little chills down her spine. Not that the chant was frightening, but rather that there was an eerie feeling of mystery to it all. John's voice increased in tone, and his hands moved to the rhythm in his singing. Si ai e hai, Siye, ahai, he chanted on and on. A Hopi song to the night, John, I asked, speaking loudly to get his attention. He looked up at us, startled. For a moment there was no recognition in his eyes. He had been completely carried away from his own meditations, with his own meditations, and was dwelling in a thought world quite apart from us. When he realized what he had done, he smiled, quite embarrassed, and said, "I'm sorry, I was dreaming, I guess." "What did you ask?" Was your chant a Hopi song to the night?" I repeated. "No, it is an ancient builder's song. The Kit We, or house song," he said, quite in possession of himself again. "Tell us of it, John." Jenny was always seeking such pearls of legend and tradition. Was it used by your people?" "Yes, long, long ago. And it is still used today," replied John. "It began so long ago that no one now knows what the words mean. We know only that they are traditionally associated with the foundation of a home. No doubt that song was sung long before the white men came to America, when the Hopi lived on the lower range of plains far to the south." John made a sweeping gesture with his arm that aptly described the flat desert areas where the explorer Coronado and his men found the Hopi nation about 1540. Jenny would have asked another question, but I signaled for her to look at John. The Indian was still swinging his arms back and forth, as if stroking the desert home of his people. "Sometimes I wish I had been born in those pre-white man days," he was saying. "It is the primitive freedom for which I yearn, that which reigned in the days which my forefathers lived, faced only with the problems of nature. Living was fair and honest then. There is no deceit in nature, no prejudice. My people raised crops out of the desert soil. They learned the secrets of storing grain and other foods. They wove cloth out of native desert cotton. They made blankets of grass and pottery of clay. They built dwellings of stone, logs, and mud. 7 cities, or pueblos as you call them, did they build in the desert. It was a difficult life, but a good one. The people became strong and enduring. The young men could run from the time the sun came up until it set again. Older folks could work endless hours in the fields. They were peaceful, happy people. Many were their songs. They sang as they plowed and planted, sang as they wove, sang as they ground corn kernels between rocks. Everything was done to song. When a builder was making his home, his first sprinkled piki, or food crumbs, on the ground where the walls were to stand, and as he did, he sang, "Sia ahai, sia ahai," again and again. It was asking a blessing on his home. "Your people had no wars?" asked Jenny. "Very few, until the white men came, seeing gold. Before them my people fled, deserting their cities and building 7 new ones on the high mesa. There they live today, and there the house song can still be heard." John was quiet for a moment. The slumbering Kona spoke several little Hopi words, moved to a more comfortable position in Jenny's arms, and continued to sleep. John looked at him adoringly. "I guess I dream too much with my eyes open," he said, smiling. "In fancy, I wander those old desert lands, and sometimes it seems very real. I sit about the old council fires, work at the crops and weaving. Then I plan a home. I lay cornerstones as my people did hundreds of years ago. I take piki and chant as I sprinkle it on the ground exactly where the walls of my home shall be. I build my home always for Kona and me, and Palimana." He had risen to his feet now and stood looking down at me. I returned to his smile and waited for him to speak the thoughts that showed in his face. "You lead me to talk," he said, laughing softly. "I do not understand it, but I guess it is because you can be trusted. You do not laugh at me. You are Aikwachi, my friend." I did not answer your word, but reached my hand toward. I did not answer by word, but reached my hand towards him. He grasped it strongly, then turned sharply away and walked out into the night towards the rim of the canyon. It was a long time before he came back, wearing a weary smile, and said simply, "I must put Kona to bed."